I'd like to welcome everyone here today. In the words of Dorsey, oh my, oh my, oh my, he would say. We're glad you're here to celebrate the life of D. Dorsey Moss in the D. Dorsey Moss Construction Laboratory. I know that Ann and the family appreciate that you're all here. He meant so much to everybody. It is nice that you're sharing your love for Dorsey with the family. One of the measures of the greatness of a man is how people relate to them when they met him or when they got to know him. Over the past few weeks, I've been privileged to receive a number of messages from alumni and others who shared their stories about meeting Dorsey and the impact he had on their lives. I'll share a few of those later, but first I thought I'd share how I got to know this great man. On the Sunday afternoon, August 21st, 1977, I was lounging around, watching a football game or something, and I received a phone call that changed my life forever. I was at home and the phone rang, and an unknown voice quickly identified himself as Dorsey Moss, department head of building construction at Purdue University. Without so much as hello, Dorsey immediately blurted out, "I understand you can teach surveying." Not knowing where this question was headed, I tentatively answered, "Yes, I've taught surveying." Dorsey replied, "Can you come to my office?" I paused and said, "When?" He said, "Now." I replied, "Sunday afternoon?" He said, "Yes, yes, yes, yes," which is one of his trademarks. "Classes start tomorrow." So sensing the urgency of this strange person on the other end of the phone line, I immediately got dressed and headed to the place called South Campus Court where Dorsey instructed me to go. I found this auspicious place and walked into Dorsey's office. In it I saw a man in a rumpled suit with a messy desk poring over some paperwork. As I stood there waiting for him to recognize that I was in the doorway, I noticed a poster on his wall that showed a mighty oak tree, a small little acorn, just like this. A single little acorn. The saying on the poster was, "The greatest oak was once an acorn that held its ground." I pondered the meaning of those words and noted that saying in my mind as Dorsey finally looked up and quickly greeted me with a warm smile and a vigorous handshake and a come in, take a seat." After a few minutes of getting to know each other and discussing my background, Dorsey paused, thought for a moment, and said, "Okay, let's do it." When I asked him if there was a syllabus or other materials for the course, Dorsey gave me one sheet of paper with a few handwritten topics and said, "This is what you should teach. Classes start tomorrow." That meeting and that single piece of paper from Dorsey has guided me in everything that I have done academically for the past 31 years. Thank you, Dorsey. This story could be repeated over and over by the rest of the faculty. Every one of us that was hired by Dorsey have a story. Some of us, Steve Goldblatt from the University of Washington was invited by Dorsey to come and interview. And when Steve got here, there was somebody else to interview. So Dorsey interviewed them both at the same time. Now, Jenkins, you're on the search committee, and I don't think it's done like that anymore, is it? And then others have their own story of how they met Dorsey. Just happened to walk into his office, and the things that he said changed their lives. He was quite an impact. Everybody in the BCM family was impacted by a phone call or a meeting or by a few words or a single sheet of paper. The greatness of Dorsey was the impact he had on the people he met. Today's celebration is about Dorsey's impact on construction education. Although Dorsey's life included honorable service to our country in World War II as a soldier and other notable contributions, we have been asked by the Moss family to recognize Dorsey's love for construction education and the College of Technology. His love was so deep that he spent endless hours of his entire life in pursuit of the dream of creating the best construction management program in the country. I believe he succeeded. At this time, I'd like to call up Stephen Moss. He would like to say a few words about the years in Fort Wayne.
On behalf of the family, I would like to thank you all for coming here. I know Father loved parties, and one of his regrets at the 40th anniversary of the department, he didn't have enough time to meet and greet and talk with everybody that he wanted to. Daniel Dorsey Moss III was originally hired to Purdue in 1964 to oversee the baccalaureate curriculum at the Fort Wayne, Hammond, and Indianapolis regional campuses. He was not supposed to come to the main campus. One day, a student came into his office, sat down in front of his desk, and declared that I do not want to be an engineer. I do not want to be a hammer and nail builder. I want to be a contractor or constructor and own my own business. Well, through Father's experience and education, he knew the difference between an engineer, architect, an engineer, a constructor or a contractor builder, and he knew exactly what the student was talking about, and he knew what was needed to make this happen. And thus was born the Building Construction Management Department, not only here at Purdue, but nationwide. And this model or this program does serve as a model for other institutes throughout the nation. Part of Father's values and beliefs were to work hard and to leave things better than when you found them. This he did, as attributed by the levels of plaques and honors that bestowed upon him, but also in your presence here. He touched everybody's life. And as was said, measure of a great man. Again, I would like to thank you all for coming here, celebrating his life. This is what he would have wanted.
Thank you very much, Steve. At this time, I'd like to go to the history of BCM and ask Professor Pat Glahn to give us a perspective of how Dorsey accomplished his BCM program.
Thank you, Wes. He said, Pat, give a history of the BCM department. You've got 3 minutes. Oh, come on, Wes, come on. I'm going to tell a couple stories. I thought I'd do something different. To start with, the BCM program started in '64, and this is the evolution of the BCM program. You can get this. Robert has it in the main office, or they're on the back table. And this is the administrative portion of it, and the struggles with Dean McNally over there. Good to see you, sir. And how he swindled you out of all those funds to pay for the faculty because of whatever reason he gave you. And the other part of the history is how we started clubs, the construction club, the ABC chapter, the first meeting of the Associated Schools of Construction, something I put together. He and I were working on this history for a while, and I just finished it up, and I guess Wes has got a copy of it, or I do. So that's the history of the BCM department. Done. Okay? How cool. 3 things. I want to share 3 things with you about Dorsey and what he did for me. I want to share his competitiveness, 1. I want to share his leadership, 2. And that's the cool one. The leadership is cool. I want to share that with you. And then his patience and perseverance on how he dealt with setbacks, which was so totally unique. I tried to emulate that, and of course I failed miserably, but I saw him do it, and I said, I'm going to do that. Just as Wes said, he followed Dr. Moss all the time. First of all, he was extremely competitive. Extremely competitive. You didn't notice that when you talked to him because he was giddy and laughing and hurry up, let's do this, let's do that. But he had a vision. He knew what he wanted to do, and there wasn't anybody going to get in his way. And I didn't realize how competitive he was when I hired on. When I found out, this is the first story, it was a trip to Canada. The country was talking about going metric, and Dorsey and I were sitting around chewing the fat, thinking, how can we, well, hi Jim, how you doing? We got all these old people here. Some I recognize, most I don't, goodness. But we were up in Canada, and we were looking for metric plans, because we figured if we had metric plans, we were the first in the country. We would get the plans, all the other construction education programs would need plans done in metric, and we could sell them ours, and we would be the leader. We would set the standard. And we didn't know where to get plans, so we said, well, who does metric? Well, Canada does metric. Okay, let's go to Canada, and off we went. So while we're up there, we were both jogging at the time. I mean, this was a long time ago. And he says, I've got my, I'm going to go jogging. You want to go? And I says, well, yeah, I'd like to run too. And so we started off, and we started talking, and pretty soon he's a half a step ahead of me. And I got even, and then maybe a little ahead, and then pretty soon he was even, and then he was ahead, and we just kept going like this. We only ran for about 20 minutes. I'll tell you what. But when it was done, we could neither one of us stand up. That man is competitive. I said, right then. We never talked about it. We never mentioned competitiveness. It was always a yin and a yang kind of thing. He did his thing, I did my thing, and that's how we got along very well. But he was competitive, point one. And by the way, we were sitting in the hotel room in Canada, and that's when we were designing this thing, and Wes mentioned the crane, and somebody else mentioned the crane. And we were looking at this thing, he was sketching it out, and he says, we got all these gears. What do we do with these gears? And I don't know if he said it or I said it, but I said, well, it needs a counterweight. You got a shell back there. And so that's where all the gears are. We put a box around it. That's the counterweight to the tower crane. Wow, how cool was that? Story 2. He was a great leader. And the way he led was he got you to believe it was your idea, and you, hi Tom, good to see you, Marion. And he got you to think it was your idea, and off you went, and in fact, he guided you the whole way. And you just didn't even know he was leading you. It was amazing. It was amazing. Well, that's it. That was just his style. He got something in his mind. He did his homework. He knew what had to be done, and he pretty much had the best way to do it. And then he would sit down with you, and through conversation, you would pretty soon pick up on where he was going and say, well, hey, if I did this, if I did that. He'd say, yeah, that's a good idea, Pat. Why don't you do that? Well, half the stories in here I thought were my idea until I got to thinking about this, and shoot, I didn't think of any of these things. They were all his idea, and he just guided me where I needed to go. He was good. So that was a great leader. Guidance and encouragement. The third thing was patience and perseverance. And this is what I learned from him. We were at South Campus Courts. I had my office. He had his at the end of the hall. Computers were just coming in. And I was taking a break out in the front there in the little lobby. And he come out and he goes, and stretched a little bit. I said, hi, Dorsey, I haven't seen you in a couple hours. What have you been doing? Oh, I've been inputting data into database or spreadsheet or something. I said, oh, good. How's it going? He says, well, not too good. I hit escape and it all went away. I says, holy cow, you've been inputting data for 2 hours and it's gone? Yeah. Well, what are you going to, my goodness gracious, you're supposed to go nuts or something. I said, so what are you going to do? He said, oh, I'll just put it in again. And turned around and off he went, to-do. And that's the way he did that. That was the patience and perseverance. And I have tried so hard to do that, and it's impossible. But he could. He did it, and that was the way he did things. Okay? Just start over. So those are the 3 stories. Okay? He was very competitive. He was a leader in that he got you to do things that you thought were your idea. And he had this tremendous patience and perseverance that guided us on to where we are today. While this thing was coming up, I just want to share, where's Ann and the Moss family? Oh, Ann's up. Oh, hi, Ann.
Hi.
And Steve, yeah. I sent off a few emails to 40 or 50 alumni, okay? And they all responded, so I put them in here. So I told everybody that I would share these things with you. So I'm going to give you this afterwards. It's a bunch of emails and things. It's pretty cool. And, okay. And finally, Dorsey lives on through all of us. And it was a fortunate set of circumstances that I happened to be in the right position at the right time. And when his train was leaving the station to create this program, I just hitched my wagon to it. Boom. And off we went. Dorsey.
You're welcome. You can see why Pat was our entertainer for many years. This alumni from the 70s and 80s realize that. At this time, I'd like to give alumni any opportunity that they would like to say a few words about Dorsey. Any of our alumni would like to come forward?
Hi, I'm Ruth Drake, alumni 1982. One of the earlier ones, I guess, that were with Wes and Pat and a few others. I just have one short thing to say, and that it reminded me very strongly of a song that says it's not what you take, but what you leave behind. And I think we can all understand where Dorsey comes from. You could just think about that one saying.
Good afternoon. My name is Guy East. I graduated from the program in 1982. And when I think about Dr. Moss, I think of one thought, and that is second chance. You see, without Dr. Moss, I probably wouldn't still be in the building industry. Because when I was here early, my father and I first met him in the fall of 1978. We designed the curriculum, and I was here to play a little bit of football, probably a lot more football than to study. But a year later, I found myself at Dr. Moss's desk, pleading to not fail me for what I deserved in the statics class. And after a couple weeks of anticipation and wondering whether he was going to grant my plea or not, I opened the report card to find that he had in fact done that. I had not failed on the report card, but I had a deal with him, and he held up to his end of the deal, and now it was up to me to live up to mine. And so I attempted that class again with Wes Crawford that next semester, and ended up dropping out of that class then, because one of the things that Dr. Moss said is that you've got to understand statics. If you are going to be committed and be a contributor in this industry, you've got to understand this. And so, unfortunately, I dropped out of Wes's class, and it was my third attempt to finally get that right, and I was able to ace it when I understood it. So, second chance, I would not have been able, and it wasn't about learning the curriculum that I remember Dorsey Moss. It wasn't about any particular lesson. It was about that second chance, because you know, when we have second chance, I have learned this, and we've learned it through struggles in life, that we have hope. And that hope to go on has been incredible, because if I had failed that, and if he hadn't worked with me, and if we hadn't had that deal that we put together, I really strongly believe that I would not be here, because I probably would have given up on this industry feeling like it didn't need me, and then I couldn't contribute. But he had hope in me, he had faith in me, and I just really wanted to share that, because it is, hope will never let us down, and he taught that lesson to me. So I wanted to share that.
I just wanted to say two things about Dorsey, though. I admired and inspired me so much. And those two things were vision and his ability to take a risk. Because at the time that I met him, no other department in the School of Technology had a counselor. and he was willing to take a chance, hired me on the spot, and said, "You're going to be a counselor." So to this day, I'm grateful for that because I thoroughly enjoy it. And I always thought construction was a marvelous field to be in. He also took a risk by having women in the program. This is a male-dominated field. I was the only woman on the staff, and it was amazing how much faith he had in women and their ability to come forth and do what needed to be done. So thanks so much, Dorsey, for so many contributions worldwide to construction.
A couple of letters that were sent to me that I would like to read through from alumni. This comes from John Hockey. John is one of our distinguished technology alumni. He wrote this on Thursday. It's with a heavy heart that I sit down to comprise this message. It is no easy task to choose these words, ever so carefully, that are worthy of honoring someone that has affected so many lives, including my own. However, as we join to honor the passing of D. Dorsey Moss, I press on to do just that. I would like to start by saying there's no doubt in my mind that his spirit is here with us now. Being seated in the D. Dorsey Moss Construction Laboratory, Conoy Hall, Purdue University, his presence can be seen, touched, smelled, and heard all around us. A concrete example of his life. Metaphorically, I think Dr. Moss would be proud to have his spirit associated with the words concrete, steel, soil, fiberglass, wood. Although we are gathered in this room today to memorialize its namesake, I think that everybody in this room knows that it's the people that he has touched, not the structures, that are his true legacy. But before going any further, let me take you back some 30 years. During the summer of 1978, between my junior and senior years of high school, I met Dr. Moss at the first time, interviewing him to find out more about the BCM program at Purdue. It was not a long interview, 30 minutes at most, but it played a major role in my life. Ironically, he seemed to almost discourage me from taking the BCM route and suggested that I become a civil engineer. His point being was that I was not exactly sure what I wanted to do, so take the path that would be potentially less definitive. In fact, at 17 years of age, I had not really given it much thought, but after researching further, I decided that the BCM program was for me. During my 4 years at Purdue, Dr. Moss served as our department head. He was my professor for a class and the overseer of all. One of the other things I remember about the staff at the time was their greatest respect for Dr. Moss, which in turn feed down to the students. To this day, I remember a quote that I heard on one occasion from Professor Pat Glahn. Dr. Moss has forgotten more things than most people ever learn in a lifetime. I think it was a good way of putting it. As some of you may know, I've been involved in the endowment named after Dr. Moss. As part of that process, I was honored to have the opportunity of spending some 4+ hours with Dr. Moss touring Conoy Hall and watching a football game together. Although it rained most of the football game, that turned out to be a blessing. In an effort to stay out of the rain, we sat inside the Siley Club just talking. Over a 2-hour period, we talked about how he was raised, his parents, his own education, how he ended up at Purdue, and how he designed his home. I considered it one of the rare opportunities to speak one-on-one with somebody whose life was obviously worth taking note. I consider that time together to be my highlight reel of lifetime experiences. In closing, when a person has lived a life as involved and as diverse as Dr. Moss, the impact of that person's life goes well beyond the individuals in which they had direct contact. The impact goes into the lives of these people like me, who have passed in the same interest of helping educate, nurture, and impact people that we interact. And so it goes. Another one of our distinguished technology alumni, John Daruki. I just received the email announcing the passing of Dr. Moss, and unfortunately I won't be able to attend the services. We have an extremely important proposal due on the 3rd, and I've got to be here. Our first job out of state is what he says. I definitely would have enjoyed saying something in honor of Dr. Moss because of him. I have enjoyed a fantastic career, well beyond anything I could have imagined, and I owe that to a chance meeting I had with him when I wandered into the department office several years ago. He stopped everything he was doing, spent an hour and a half explaining the program, went through the endless career opportunities, and was so excited about the construction industry, I was raring to go. Thank God he wasn't an Army recruiter. I would have re-enlisted right there. I am one of the fortunate individuals who had the ability to watch Dr. Moss as a department head and also have him as a professor. He was great at both. He always encouraged questions, never made you feel bad for asking the silliest questions, and was always willing to explore a crazy idea, even though he knew it was crazy before going down that road. He just wanted to make you work hard and think even harder. The sign of a great teacher in my book. My appreciation for Dr. Moss has continued to grow for 25 years now. Every day of my career I have drawn on that education I received at Purdue and consider myself extremely lucky. Thank you, Dr. Moss. This man had vision. He knew what the industry needed. He assembled the best team and went out and created the finest program in the country. Unfortunately, you do not appreciate this while you are there. I'm talking to the students up there now. If you did, then every day you would walk into that classroom, shake your professor's hand, and say, "Thank you for preparing me ahead of the peers I will soon have in the construction industry." That appreciation started for me during my first week out of school when I found myself explaining simple concepts to other guys from other Midwestern universities that will remain nameless, who would ask me, "How did you do that?" Right then, I knew how much better prepared I was, and I thank my lucky stars for making the right choice. I'm sure the department will always honor Dr. Moss. Who knows, possibly someday we will have our own building on campus and name it the D. Dorsey Moss Hall. However, I think the best way to honor Dr. Moss would be if each alumni and future alumni would give back 1% of the energy that Dr. Moss gave to the department. With that kind of energy, who knows, maybe a couple of our current freshmen will build the first D. Dorsey Moss space station. Wonderful letters. And one last one, this comes from Randy Kett, who was another one of our distinguished technology alums, who spoke at the 40th anniversary last spring. And this is basically the speech that he gave at that, and I just wanted to read one paragraph out of it. I think back to my experience here at Purdue. After high school, I was a confused kid with no particular course toward a career or life for that matter. I found a laborer's job with a local contractor. My girlfriend hooked me up with that job, and 4 years later, she became my wife. It's amazing how things have not changed in 30 years. It's still a networking business. Having had the experience of working the smart end of a shovel, sledgehammer, and crowbar for a year, in early August of 1976, I wandered my way into Dr. Moss's office in South Campus. In the South Campus Mecca, is what he actually said. He put his pencil down and listened to me explain everything I did not know about college and possible degree pursuits. He encouraged me to try engineering, and if that did not suit me, I could always come over to construction. I tried engineering. In 10 weeks, I kodoed over to construction with Dr. Moss's approval. I worked pretty hard and did pretty well. In the spring of my senior year, a local contractor I worked with part-time at a project expanding the library here on campus. I was talking with some of my co-workers when Dr. Moss and some recruiters from Hubert Hunt and Nichols walked by on their way. Dr. Moss said, "That's the guy you want to hire." They did, and I'm still with Hunt 27 years later. Dr. Moss, thank you for everything you've done for me and the hundreds of graduates and the lives you've touched and introduced to the fabulous industry. I thank every day that I'm a builder. And I've got other letters, but we don't have enough time. At this time, I'd like to ask Arch Alexander to come up and read some notes from Steve Easley, who was instrumental in designing, along with Dr. Moss, this laboratory.
Steve sent a nice letter along that I'd like to
read the comments he made from. But before I do that, I wanted to just add one thing to the stories Wes was telling earlier about Dorsey's hiring procedures. And I thought it might be interesting to relate the story of how he hired me. And I had contacted him probably early in the summer and inquired as to the possibility of there being a job available. And he probably responded, but I hadn't heard anything for some time. And it was getting later and later in the summer, nearing fall, and I didn't have plans for sure at that point. And I ran into Dorsey at the grocery store, just bumped into him. And he, of course, as usual, very friendly, and I said, have you decided anything on who you would be, if you're going to have a position, or whether you're going to be hiring anybody this fall? He says, oh yeah, you. He said, I'm looking forward to you being there. It was just as if, I went without saying. So Dorsey hired me in the grocery store, and I've been here ever since, and I'm thankful for the opportunity to work with that gentleman. This is from Steve Easley, and let me just read you his letter. I was very saddened to hear about Dorsey's passing. I wish I could be with you on this day honoring Dorsey's memory and spirit. I appreciate him giving me a chance to teach at Purdue, but also the great opportunity to learn from him. I still remember the excitement of preparing for our long-awaited move from the Spartan South Campus courts into the state-of-the-art Conoy Hall. From the time that the BCM space was carved out by the architects, Dorsey was hard at work trying to figure out how to utilize the awkward-shaped space that would be one of the few university construction laboratories in the U.S. where students could build real buildings. Dorsey knew that the most efficient way to teach young minds how to visualize the complex details of building construction was to bring them to life by having the students actually do the work. Unfortunately, the construction lab space had one major shortcoming, and we're looking at it right here. That prevented it from being a usable space, a large column right in the middle of the lab. We all looked at the plans on several occasions and wondered what we could do with that odd space other than just build sections of buildings. It was Dorsey Moss, to quote Dean George McNally, that turned lemons into lemonade. Dorsey's idea to turn the awkward placement of a support column into a tower crane transformed a space with marginal value into one of the best and most realistic teaching tools in the country. In fact, one of Purdue's proudest moments was to showcase this construction lab to President Ronald Reagan when he visited Purdue University in the mid-1980s. One summer, in preparing for moving into Conoy Hall, Charlie Reiling, Dorsey, and I had the challenging task of designing the course and the buildings that would be built by the student constructors in this lab. We had many meetings and discussions about what the course would include, as well as the design of the 3 buildings the students would work on. In addition, we needed to figure out how these buildings could be utilized by other courses like surveying and scheduling and construction materials classes. Dorsey had so many creative ideas. There were so many times I said to myself, why didn't I think of that? Dorsey's vision was to put students in a real world, in as real world as environment as possible, and he knew instinctively that this lab would further expose students to challenges and experiences that would foster learning far beyond what textbooks did and develop their problem-solving skills. Dorsey will always be one of the most positive influences in my life. I will always thank God for him playing such an important role in my life as a teacher, a mentor, and a friend. He set a great example, and we are all honored to follow. Dr. Moss will always be remembered as the heart and soul and creator of the finest construction school in America. And to find out how this lab has been used, I call on Dale Kaler.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Dale Kaler, and I actually came aboard after the building was built in the fall of 1985. So I had to pick up, the train already left the station, and I had to figure out what are they trying to do. And so I basically was mentored by Professor Easley for several semesters, actually several years. And from there, we started to look to see how we continue to keep things creative. The challenge of any facilities for education is that it gets to be old news. Steve was just like, Mr. Goo-Goo when it came to the steel building that you see here, because he designed it, he ordered the steel, it all came in, and he had a lot of fun with it. And of course, Dr. Moss saw that whole thing just evolving, and that was just a great time for him. And by the time I picked it up, I had to figure out, well, what do we do to take it to the next level? Take the crane out, put something else in here, or what do we do? And so that's been the challenging part over the years, and I have a small demonstration to show those of you that aren't familiar with this lab of what we try to do. And essentially it's visualization. And we've taken this lab and we used it not just to build the steel building, but we've actually have some masonry up front where part of the audience is sitting. We just tore down a wood frame building. But if you look at this masonry, the steel structure, it's more than steel. There's cabling up on top. There's ribbons on that cabling. We use these buildings to teach safety, but not through the textbook. Because the rules say that that cable needs to withstand 200 pounds of force with minimum deflection. Well, the students better know what minimum deflection means by the rules of OSHA. So they actually put the cable up, and they have to test the cable to see whether or not they meet those standards. So then it becomes a relationship between not just what the book says, but what they do. And it's all done in light of the fact that they are going to manage the process. Well, you can't manage the process until you walk the walk. And that's why this building, we leave this section up all year long, because we use it for ladder safety, for fall protection safety, managing steel, along with the process of actually putting up a steel building and using the tower crane for everything that comes with it. So it's a lot of fun, but at the same time, it really helps people understand things. Now, some of you that are mechanically minded, you're going to say, well, there's a lot of common sense, but even which direction does a bolt go in that steel building is not a dumb question. Now, for those of us that are born and raised in farms like I was, we were tinkering with that in our very younger years, but our society doesn't give us that privilege anymore. A lot of eager students come through the door, and they never ever dealt with it. So we even get to that level, we just don't count the bolts, but we say, well, how's it supposed to work, and how do you make things happen? Well, it all goes back to visualization, and what we figured out is that if you can't physically see it up here, you're going to be limited in how you teach. And that's really the philosophy of Professor Moss, from my perspective, coming on board after the building was up. So what I want to demonstrate to you right here is something very simple. I've got two tools of the trade. All right, this is a framing square. Now, there's possibly nobody in this room that actually knows how to read a framing square. And if you do, you are definitely someone special. Even myself, as being a builder, I don't use all the detail of framing square. That's a carpenter's role. Most of us understand how to use a level and to put it into action. So what we do is we build things, and what's behind me is a masonry structure. Now, the students built it in my freshman class, and it wasn't intended to be built with something of great quality. In fact, you look at it, it's terrible. I mean, it's ugly. But it's also, just a side note, it also keeps them in school. In other words, I'll say, I tell them, I said, everybody's going to go through a second year drama. I'm running out of money. Should I go back to school? I said, remember those 40-pound blocks you laid in 175 class? Just remember that. So what we do is we give them these tools in class. But we say, well, when you're on the job site, you're going to be using lasers. He said, well, how does a laser work? Well, it's this thing that shoots this beam, and it's like a radar detector, shoots beams and stuff. Well, you can't see that. You can't see it in the job site. But in a matter of a few seconds, you're going to see it in here. We're going to turn on our laser. And we're going to demonstrate, basically it'll take a moment to fire up. It's just got to warm up for a second. it's going to show you that we actually are going to shoot a red laser beam. And I'll speak off the microphone. So now the students can actually see this imaginary plane. It's a red line. It just shoots all the way across. So rather than using this traditional level to keep a building going vertically correctly, they can not only study the laser, but they can see it in this lab. And so there's an imaginary plane that runs the full length of this lab, and you can build the building and measure to that plane, and that's the visualization. And we thought this would be the most appropriate, the easiest for this group to see how we develop learning activities. And now when a student looks at a laser and says, oh, this is kind of neat, well, can we use a laser going the opposite direction? Well, certainly. You can use it in a lot of different applications. But it's the visualization. And then we link that to other things. All right, we'll take the lights on. So the neat part about it is it doesn't stop. Now, my students are actually going to have to go back and do a quality control check of their own work. And of course, it's going to be rejected because it's not going to meet the requirement. But the thing about it is that it's always so easy to criticize somebody else's work. It's tougher when you have to evaluate your own. So we've learned, even as a freshman, this is the beginning student, this is the second semester on campus, we're putting them through the process where they actually have to evaluate what they build. And that's really, it's nice. It's the fact that they get very, they buy into the process. There's no other way to explain it. And then, and most of them, the students that graduate, when they give us our report card to say, well, how did we do as a program? The 175 class, the class that uses this lab, seems to get a passing grade on a routine basis because we got things rolling, but it's truly the visualization. And we tie that together with being able to do things like quality control, sketching different products. We want every student leaving the first year in our program to be knowledgeable of safety, so we really push hard everything from fall protection. The only thing I haven't allowed them to do is to throw somebody off the balcony and try to test the fall protection requirements. Although we have used a crane, because, and I'll summarize this way, this has been done a couple times already. There's a limit. If you fell off some work platform and had a fall protected harness on, you still have to be rescued within a very short period of time. We're talking minutes. So the students say, well, how can I be creative to emphasize that? It's the impact of the harness on the body. So we've actually taken the crane, put a student with a fall protection harness with a D-ring in the back, and lifted them off the floor to have them understand the pressure points. And it's those types of things. And of course, I came when Dr. Moss was active, but later years when he wasn't active at faculty, he still used to sneak through this lab. And any time he'd see it on there, you could just see the twinkle in his eye. It was always kind of neat. Because you said, ooh, that's getting the creativeness out of it. And it's my role and give you as an audience an idea of how we try to teach. And we don't do everything the same every semester. We mix and match and do whatever we can. So anyway, I thank Doc for my privilege for being involved with Dr. Moss, and that is giving me this tool, the tool being the construction lab. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dale. At this time, I'd like to have Steve Schutte, our former department head, come up and see how Dorsey related to his career in construction.
Thank you, Wes. Oftentimes we don't tell a person thank you as many times as we should before they pass on. But I truly had a great opportunity to do this last year at the 40th reunion, and I gave Dorsey a note, and I thought maybe it would be appropriate to read that note to you today. Dorsey, first I would like to thank you for providing the opportunity to several thousand people that have embarked on a professional career in construction. Many of these people have had highly successful careers as leaders in the construction industry. My first encounter with you goes back to about 1966 or 67. That is a long time ago, so I don't exactly remember the date. But I was a student at Bradley University, and ASC was having a meeting at Bradley campus in that year. The ASC at that time was primarily attended by department heads and program directors. You were, along with several other founding fathers of construction education. I was a student shuttle driver for the group. You guys did influence my decision to eventually become an educator. My second encounter with you was in 1975. I stopped by Purdue on my way to Illinois to interview for with a construction firm. You made me an offer to teach. Thank God the offer was low, because I took the job with a construction firm and earned my 9 years degree in the School of Hard Knocks. During my years at Clemson University, I had several occasions to interact with you and your faculty at Purdue. I remember in the 80s, the ASC had their annual meeting at Purdue. What an experience. We all saw the house that Dorsey built. World-class lab. To this day, I remember going over in that area and going up in the elevator. We had to leave the building early because it happened to be the same weekend or the same day that President Reagan was coming by to review the program. Just influenced me tremendously. Dorsey, your vision, leadership, and inspiration have impacted more than just those at Purdue. Many outside have looked at our construction program as the true leader in construction education. This could not have happened without you. Thank you for all that you have done for construction education, not just at Purdue, but for the United States. It was a joy to know him.
Thank you, Steve. Our current department head, Robert Cox, would also like to share his insight.
Thank you, Wes. Thanks, everybody, for allowing me to share my thoughts on Dr. Moss in today's celebration of his life and the contributions to construction education and our industry. I'm going to break my comments down into 3 parts, but I didn't steal it from Pat Glenn. I already wrote it down on my paper. First is going to be meeting Dorsey. I think everybody has a common ground story about that. The second one is about Dorsey's network. And the third part is about carrying the flag. I met Dorsey on my first day on the Purdue campus, which was during my interview, January 29th, 2006, in Kenoi 202. He came up and introduced himself to me before I made my presentation to the search committee and the rest of the college administrators and faculty that were there. And just his calm nature and his inquisitive smile put me at ease and has had an impact on me ever since I met him. And as a matter of fact, I really love the picture that we have on the table, because that's the inquisitive smile that Dorsey always carried when he came by to see us. The next time I saw Dorsey was one of my first days on the job, when he came by sometime during the first week of July, and he wanted to make sure that I was welcome, and he wanted to make sure that if I needed anything, he was here, and he wanted to make sure that I had settled in smoothly, and that was very, very nice of him. Very kind, warm man. And he continued to visit us all the time. And I think in the announcement, it wasn't like he was sneaking up on us, but it was certainly a pleasure to see him in the halls or when he came by, because it always uplifted everybody in the program. And as a matter of fact, we were concentrating on this lab element here today, but this lab element was one of the most attractive things to me personally as an administrator in construction education that helped me make the decision that I wanted to come, because I had tried for 13 years to accomplish something similar to this at the University of Florida in my previous life before Purdue. And I think that this lab is still the most admired lab of any construction program in the country. And we oftentimes wonder how such a lab can exist at a Research One institution, and we prove every day its value. So it's a wonderful asset, and I really appreciate Dr. Moss's vision in creating this lab. So number 2 is Dorsey's network. And I like to refer to it as the Dorsey net. We have the internet, but there's the Dorsey net. There's several thousand BCM alumni who were touched by Dr. Moss. And that's while they were attending college or even afterwards. But no matter where I've traveled over the past 2 years in meeting with alumni and industry partners, they all ask me about Dorsey. Never fails. They always ask me, and then they always share a story about how he impacted their life. And I think that all the stories that you've already heard today reflect that because of the fact that he took the time to meet you, to greet you, to make you feel welcome, just like he did me on my first days on campus and the first time I met him. Those great stories, you know, he impacted everybody's lives, and he kept the kind and what somebody shared with me, yet firm approach to helping people accomplish their goals, and maybe, as Pat was sharing, maybe there were some of his visions as well. And I also wanted to share with you that my connection to the Dorsey Net actually happened without me even knowing it more than 15 years ago through one of Dorsey's proteges named Ivan Beliveau. And Ivan served as my mentor and PhD chairman at Virginia Tech. And so I can tell everyone that Dorsey had an influence on my life before I'd ever even met Dorsey personally. I am sure that there are many more like me out there that are being influenced in many positive ways due to the Dorsey network of people. And of course, it keeps growing because as we continue to use this lab and impact the students of the future, so does the impact Dorsey has made on our industry. Number 3 is carrying the flag. Dorsey was on a lifelong mission, and everybody he met knew it. Come on, hurry up, basically, right? So today I challenge everyone here to pick up where Dorsey left off and forge ahead on his mission as educators, as students, as contractors, to improve the lives of everyone you touch, just like Dorsey did, to make construction education what it is today. We have a great foundation for educating the future leaders of construction, and I am honored to have been a member of his network. So now I ask everyone here today, will you help me carry the flag? Wes.
Thank you, Robert. And at this time, I'd like to call upon our dean, Dennis, to talk about his relationship with Dorsey.
Well, I'm the one with no notes. That may be the good news. I came to Purdue in 1985 as a graduate student in the College of Technology, and at that time, Dorsey was a larger-than-life individual anyway, and you stop and think about the impact that he's had on people, particularly students. As I sat and listened to a lot of this today, that was really what drove Dorsey. It was about helping others, helping students succeed. And sometimes I've heard folks talk about success being where opportunity and preparation intersect. And I thought a lot over the last few days about Dorsey taking advantage of opportunity and certainly his own preparation, and seeing a vision become reality over the last, nearly half a century. We've all heard the stories of Hooke and Newton and standing on the shoulders of giants, and we have some of them with us today. Dean McNally, many people who strived, worked hard, who stayed true to a vision, and stayed true to their heart to see something good come to pass. And I was just thinking that, it was a few days after Dorsey's passing, just down the hallway here, actually, it's B0331 or 33, I can never remember the number, but in the spring of the year I have an opportunity to teach one class, and I remind my friends and the other deans on campus who don't do much of this teaching stuff that 8:30 Monday and Wednesday, Friday morning, in fact in the morning at 8:30, sometimes the best 50 minutes of my week is that day. And I have an opportunity in that class. It's a statistical quality control course, and BCM students take it as a substitute for statistics. I hope it's a good substitute. About a third of the class is actually BCM students, and some of the best students in the class, truly. I wasn't paid to say that. They're really good kids, bright kids, hardworking kids, good work ethic. And we try to put a bit of an applications bent to statistics so that it's not something a little different than 301T. And I try really hard to put some construction-related examples in the class. I grew up in the construction industry as a kid, and so it's a little easier for me to do that. But just a few days after Dorsey's passing, I happened to walk into class, and these BCM students, they
they're cute because they cluster together. I have to work hard to try to, mix them up and get them to sit with other places in the class. And I just happened to walk in a little early, and one of the young men in the class said something about Dr. Moss passing away. And I was really intrigued with that here was a junior who, not only knew about the legacy of Dorsey and the important influence he'd had on the development of this program, which is nationally recognized on any measure. And so we struck up a conversation, and I learned very quickly as the class finally filled that there was a teachable moment here. And I took advantage of it. We didn't spend the first part of the class talking about means and standard deviations and the normal distribution. We spent a good part of the class talking about staying true to your heart, following a vision, being tenacious, setting goals, working hard to achieve those goals. And all that was really around the life of Dr. Moss. And then I posed the question, what if? What if there had not been a Dr. Dorsey Moss who was prepared and was committed to taking advantage of an opportunity? What kind of conversation would we be having this morning? It became very somber in that classroom. Not only the BCM students, but the computer graphics students and the MET students and the others. And reminded them that there's something in life called giving back, paying it forward. And that we could all learn a lesson from this life that Dorsey lived and his commitment to other people. And to take that lesson to heart. And that's a lesson I think that we can take to heart today as well. Is honor the vision, honor his commitment, and stay true to it for the next 50 years. Thank you to the Moss family, and thanks to all of you for allowing me the opportunity to be here this afternoon.
Thank you, Dean. At this time, I wanted to see if there's anyone else who'd like to come up. I know that I also already talked to Dean McNally, and he said that he would like to say a few words, or he would take the opportunity to do that. I wanted to relate how he was probably the biggest motivator of Dorsey, because he kept saying no, and Dorsey kept saying yes, 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 yes. Dorsey oftentimes in about April of every year would say, well, we're out of money. He said, but don't worry about it. He would just go on down to the end of South Campus and get more. I don't know exactly how I did. I told Robert that he ought to start using that same philosophy. I'm not sure that he has. So at this time, George, would you like to come up?
Thank you, Wes. It's really an honor to speak to you today. Dorsey Moss was a rare and wonderful person, and it was my pleasure to have had a part in bringing him to Purdue, making him a department head and bringing him to this campus. And this is one of the wonderful things that happened to me during my life as dean. Dorsey was a very creative person. He was able to attract the best faculty of its kind in the world, who in turn attracted the best students. And I think our alums would certainly validate that opinion. One of the unusual things about Dorsey, he was always ahead of everybody, including myself. And you're right, Wes, about bailing Dorsey out once every year. We had to come up with the money to handle the programs that he started without the money. And he was always way ahead of everybody else in the administration. It'd be several years before we'd catch up to Dorsey. It was also one of my unhappy moments when I had to tell Dorsey that there was going to be a major building column in the middle of his construction laboratory. If you don't think this was a problem. I said, Dorsey, I hate to tell you this, I've argued with the architect, I can't get it changed, but you're going to have a major building column in the middle of your construction lab. he just looked at me, smiled, and said, "Don't worry about it." In no time at all, he came up with the idea of a circular crane, where he previously had a gantry crane going the whole length. This was the most creative solution to a problem. And talking about making lemonade out of lemon, this guy could do it. And this lab then became famous. Other universities looked at it and said, "We're going to have the same." And they built columns right in the middle of the laboratory. This is the kind of guy Dorsey was. And it was certainly my honor and pleasure to have worked with him over the years. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to say a few words?
I would.
Thank you.
This place isn't very well designed. We've heard a lot about Professor Moss's achievements in his field today. And I'm sorry to say I don't remember exactly when I met him for the first time. I do remember talking to him on the telephone and how very friendly he was. The thing was, I was in graduate school in the English department. I'm all about the liberal arts, and he was all about the engineering. And we always were able to have cordial conversations, but we just didn't really share common interests. And I thought, well, one time I remember coming down to visit my husband, Steve, and it was a 7.5-hour drive. I remember getting out of the car and Mr. Moss coming up and saying, "Hi, how are you?" And I got out and said, "Hi, how are you?" And I turned to get one of my bags and he was off. You know, he just, "Hi, bye." But anyway, he was very affectionate, but I wasn't really sure if he really bought into our relationship until the day we got married. It was after the ceremony, after the reception, and we were all leaving the building, and he was going up a stairway. And I remember wanting to say goodbye. I thought, I can't let him leave without saying goodbye. So I kind of grabbed hold of his coat, and he turned around and gave me the most enthusiastic, most affectionate hug I think I had ever had. I just felt like he was really glad to have me in the family. So he was brilliant in his field, a very accomplished man, but he also had a big heart.
There's also up on the wall up there, there's a poster. Early in my presentation, I walked into his office and I saw a poster. And that poster stated that the greatest oak was once an acorn that held its ground. I think by now you have a feel that Dorsey held his ground and became a mighty oak in the field of construction education. Between my fingers is a small acorn. From this acorn, a mighty oak could grow. In this room, there are many acorns. Many of you are acorns from the mighty oak that was Dorsey Moss. Many of you were impacted by Dorsey's vision and have become great oak trees from the acorns that were sown by Dorsey. Use your acorns to continue Dorsey's legacy. So in closing, I ask you that every time that you see an acorn on a sidewalk, in your yard, in the woods, pause, pick it up, and think of the mighty oak that we knew as Dorsey Moss. I really appreciate everyone being here and sharing with us your comments about Dorsey. Many of you and your people that emailed me indicated they would like to contribute to his legacy. This isn't church, but there's a basket back there with envelopes in it for anybody who would like to contribute. Pledge cards and so on. I'd like for you to join the Moss family up on the mezzanine here in a few minutes for some refreshments and continue to share your memories of our beloved Dorsey. Note, there are no restrooms on this floor. If you need a restroom, you have to go upstairs. Either go out and go up a flight of 10 steps, or take either one of the elevators up to any floor. There are restrooms on all the other floors, but there's none on this one, so I just wanted to point that out for any of you that might need a restroom. At this time, I would like to thank you very much for coming and sharing with the Moss family, and thank you for sharing Dorsey with us. Appreciate it.